A song needs roughly 250 streams just to earn a single dollar. A number one hit with a billion streams sounds like a fortune. Run the actual math, and the songwriter's cut of that billion stream hit can land somewhere under $50,000 split multiple ways. So if the music isn't where the money lives, where does it actually go? Because somebody's getting rich off that billion streams. It's just very rarely the person whose voice is on the recording. Here's the problem with the way most people picture a famous musician's finances. You imagine a hit song like a lottery ticket. One single, one moment of viral luck, and the money simply arrives. That's not how this business works, and the gap between the fantasy and the mechanism is where almost every famous musician's real financial story actually happens, including the ones who end up broke standing next to a platinum plaque. Being a famous musician is not really a music business. It is a licensing and logistics business that happens to have a voice attached to it. And once you understand that distinction, every confusing headline about a chart topping artist filing for bankruptcy stops being confusing at all. Let's take this apart the way an actual artist manager has to see it, not the way it looks from the audience. Before we talk about money, we need to talk about what kind of musician we're even discussing, because famous musician describes several completely different businesses wearing the same spotlight. A major label pop artist operates inside a corporate financing structure where the label fronts enormous sums and claws them back before the artist sees a dollar. An independent artist keeps a far larger share of a far smaller pie, financing everything themselves. A legacy catalog artist, someone whose biggest hits are decades old, is really running a royalty collection business, not a touring one. A songwriter for hire who never appears on stage at all can be genuinely wealthy while remaining almost anonymous to the public. And a hip hop or pop artist with a strong brand deal portfolio may earn more from a sneaker or liquor partnership than from every song they've ever released combined. These are not the same business. They share a stage and a fan base, but the actual mechanics of how money moves are almost unrecognizable from one category to the next. This script focuses primarily on the major label touring artist, the version most people picture when they imagine a famous musician, and the version with the most moving and most misunderstood parts. The first trap sits inside the record deal itself, and it's the one almost nobody outside the industry understands correctly. When a major label signs an artist, the number that leaks to the press, sometimes a $2 million deal, sometimes 20 million, is not a payment. It is a loan. The technical term is an advance, and it works exactly like a cash advance from a credit card, except the collateral is the artist's own future royalties. A label fronts the artist money to live on, to record, to tour support in the early years, and every single dollar of it has to be paid back out of the artist's own earnings before the artist sees a single additional cent. This process is called recoupment, and it is the single most misunderstood mechanic in the entire music business. Here's what actually gets recouped: recording costs, studio time, producer fees, sometimes running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per album. Music video budgets, which can run from $50,000 for a modest concept up past $1 million for a heavily produced cinematic release. Tour support, the difference between what a young artist tour actually earns and what it costs to send them on the road opening for a bigger act. Promotional costs, radio promotion staff, publicist retainers, sometimes even the cost of the artist's own wardrobe and styling for a specific campaign. All of it gets added to a running tab, and the artist does not see meaningful royalty income again until that entire tab is paid off. Industry estimates suggest the substantial majority of signed major label artists, likely more than 8 in 10, never fully recoup their advance across their careers, meaning the label absorbed the loss, but the artist also never crossed into real ongoing royalty income from record sales. The advance felt like getting rich. It was actually a loan against a future that, for most artists, never fully arrives. And the modern version of this deal has gotten more aggressive, not less. Many contemporary major label contracts are structured as what the industry calls a 360 deal, named for the fact that the label takes a percentage cut of everything the artist earns across a full 360 degrees of their career, not just record sales. That includes a slice of touring income, a slice of merchandise revenue, and in some versions, a slice of brand endorsement deals entirely unrelated to music. The justification labels give is straightforward enough. If the label's marketing and promotional spend is what built the artist's fame in the first place, the label argues it deserves a cut of every revenue stream that fame now generates, not just the recordings it directly financed. For the artist, it means a single recording contract signed early in a career, often before any leverage exists to negotiate, can end up taxing income streams that have nothing to do with the actual music at all. Now layer in the ownership structure because a song is not one asset. It's legally two separate assets stacked on top of each other, and famous musicians frequently own only one of them. The master recording is the actual audio file, the specific performance captured in the studio. The composition is the underlying song itself, the melody and lyrics, which exist independently of any specific recording. A major label deal typically has the label owning the masters outright, sometimes permanently, while the artist retains only their share of the composition through a separate publishing deal. This is not a minor technicality. It means an artist can have a song streamed a billion times, hear it in every commercial and film trailer for a decade, and still not own the actual recording that made them famous. Every time that master gets licensed for a commercial, a film, a sample by another artist, the label collects the master use fee. The artist, if they even see anything, collects only their composition royalty, typically a much smaller slice. This exact structure is why so many legacy artists spend years, sometimes decades, fighting to buy back the rights to their own early recordings, and why some never succeed at all. The song became famous, the artist became famous, the actual master recording asset, the thing generating licensing revenue every time it plays, may belong to someone who has never picked up an instrument in their life. Streaming is where the public's mental model breaks down most completely, so let's run the real math slowly. Per stream payouts across major platforms typically land somewhere between 3/10 of a cent and half a cent, depending on the platform, the listener's subscription tier, and the specific royalty pool math in play that month. That means it genuinely does take somewhere in the range of 200 to 300 streams just to generate a single dollar of total revenue before that dollar is even split between label, publisher, songwriter, and performer. Now scale that up. A song with 500 million streams, a number that sounds enormous and does represent genuine cultural reach, generates somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 to $2 million in total streaming revenue across its entire life. That total then gets divided. The label typically takes the largest single share since they finance the recording and own the master. The remaining portion splits between publishing rights holders, and only then does a royalty rate, frequently somewhere between 10 and 20% of the artist's respective share, actually reach the performer, and that's before subtracting whatever remains on their recoupment balance. Run the numbers on a songwriter who didn't perform the song at all, just wrote it or co-wrote it, and their statutory mechanical royalty share of that same half-billion stream hit can genuinely land in the tens of thousands of dollars over its entire commercial life, not the multi-million dollar payday the stream count implies to an outside observer. This is why so many of the artists you'd assume are wealthiest from a genuinely massive hit are actually earning meaningfully more from a single 30-second placement of that song in a car commercial than from the first several hundred million streams combined. If recorded music isn't where the money is, where is it? Touring. And this is the part of the business almost every successful long-term artist eventually figures out, usually the hard way, early in their career. A stadium tour can gross anywhere from $50,000 a night for a mid tier artist in a 5,000 seat arena, up past several million dollars a night for an arena or stadium headliner. But gross revenue and take home profit are two almost unrelated numbers in this business because the cost structure behind a modern tour is enormous and almost entirely fixed, regardless of how many tickets actually sell. A full production tour, lighting rigs, LED screens, a live band or DJ setup, a full crew of sound engineers, riggers, and technicians, security, a tour manager, a production manager, and a caravan of trucks and buses to move all of it city to city can run production costs anywhere from $20,000 a night for a smaller theater, run up past $500,000 a night for a full stadium spectacle with elaborate staging, then add crew payroll. A touring production can easily require 30 to over 100 paid crew members, each drawing a weekly salary, whether the venue sells out or sits half empty. Add insurance, which for a major tour can run into the millions annually, once liability, cancellation, and equipment coverage are all factored together. Add transportation, fuel, hotel costs for the entire touring party, and the promoter's own cut, typically structured so the promoter takes a percentage after certain cost thresholds are cleared. Break even on a full arena tour typically requires selling somewhere between 60 and 80% of available capacity night after night, city after city for months. Miss that number consistently, and an artist can complete a tour that looks like a triumphant sold out headline run in the press while actually losing money once the full production bill comes due. There's also a cost most fans never think about at all: the travel days between shows. A tour doesn't just pay for the nights a show actually happens, it pays for every single day in between, hotel rooms for a touring party that can run past 50 people, fuel and driver costs for a fleet of tour buses and semi trucks moving overnight between cities, and per diem payments to crew, regardless of whether that day includes a show or just a drive. A single off day between two cities on a stadium run can cost tens of thousands of dollars in pure overhead, with zero ticket revenue to offset it. Route a tour poorly, with too many long drives and too few consecutive show nights, and the accumulated cost of simply moving the production from city to city can quietly erase a meaningful share of an otherwise successful run. This is also why the merchandise table at the back of every venue matters so much more than it looks. A t-shirt that costs roughly $6 to $8 to produce sells for $35 to $50 at the venue, and unlike streaming or ticket revenue, merchandise margin flows almost entirely to the artist's own touring company. Since venues typically only take a modest cut, often somewhere between 20 and 30%, rather than splitting revenue the way a label or streaming platform does. For many working artists, merchandise is quietly the single most profitable line item of an entire tour. Here's where the behavioral layer becomes just as important as the math. Fame creates a specific and dangerous illusion, both for the public watching and for the artist living it. A platinum album, a sold out arena, and a viral red carpet appearance all look identical, whether the artist is genuinely wealthy or several million dollars in debt to their own label. The lifestyle expectations that come with visible fame, private jets, luxury housing, a large paid entourage of stylists, security assistants, and creative collaborators are almost entirely funded up front by advances and tour income before any of it has actually been earned in a durable, recouped sense. An artist can be simultaneously famous, broke, and deeply in debt to their own record label, and from the outside, every visible signal says the opposite. This is compounded by a specific structural incentive inside the industry itself. A label benefits from an artist appearing successful, since perceived success drives streaming numbers, touring demand, and brand deal interest, all of which ultimately help the label recoup its own advance faster. Nobody in this business is financially incentivized to correct the public's mental model of what fame actually pays, including often the artist's own team. The entourage itself deserves its own accounting because it's rarely optional in the way outsiders assume. A working famous musician frequently carries a manager, taking a commission somewhere between 15 and 20% of gross income, a booking agent taking another 10% off live performance income, specifically, an entertainment lawyer on retainer, a business manager handling day to day finances for a separate flat fee or percentage, and a publicist on top of stylists, personal assistants, and security who travel with the artist even when they're not on tour. Stack those percentages together, and an artist can lose 30 to 40% of gross income to their own support team before touching a single production cost, tax bill, or recoupment balance. None of these people are optional if the artist wants to keep functioning at a level commensurate with their fame, and none of them get paid less simply because the artist's own take home has shrunk. If you want to see what happens when the structure goes wrong, even for a genuinely enormous artist, look at the well-documented financial collapse of the R&B group TLC, one of the best-selling girl groups in music history. At the peak of their fame in the mid 1990s, TLC had sold tens of millions of albums worldwide and were among the most visible acts in the country. And yet the group filed for bankruptcy protection during that same period of peak commercial success. Court filings and subsequent reporting trace the collapse to a structure almost identical to what we just walked through: a recording contract with a recoupment clause that required the group to pay back recording costs, video budgets, and promotional expenses before seeing meaningful royalty income, combined with an unusually low royalty percentage relative to their actual sales volume, and management and legal fees that consumed a large share of whatever income did flow through. The group was, by some later accounts, earning pennies on each dollar of album revenue their music was generating for the label, despite the albums going multi-platinum. The lesson isn't that TLC made bad music or bad career choices in any simple sense. The lesson is structural. Enormous commercial success and enormous personal wealth are not the same variable in this business, and a contract signed early in a career, before an artist has any leverage to negotiate better terms, can lock in a financial ceiling that no amount of subsequent chart success is able to lift. If you want to see what happens when the structure goes wrong, even for a genuinely enormous artist, look at the well-documented financial collapse of the R&B group TLC, one of the best-selling girl groups in music history. At the peak of their fame in the mid 1990s, TLC had sold tens of millions of albums worldwide and were among the most visible acts in the country. And yet the group filed for bankruptcy protection during that same period of peak commercial success. Court filings and subsequent reporting trace the collapse to a structure almost identical to what we just walked through: a recording contract with a recoupment clause that required the group to pay back recording costs, video budgets, and promotional expenses before seeing meaningful royalty income, combined with an unusually low royalty percentage relative to their actual sales volume, and management and legal fees that consumed a large share of whatever income did flow through. The group was, by some later accounts, earning pennies on each dollar of album revenue their music was generating for the label, despite the albums going multi-platinum. The lesson isn't that TLC made bad music or bad career choices in any simple sense. The lesson is structural. Enormous commercial success and enormous personal wealth are not the same variable in this business, and a contract signed early in a career before an artist has any leverage to negotiate better terms can lock in a financial ceiling that no amount of subsequent chart success is able to lift. Now, put that story next to a completely different model in the same industry. The artists who've built the most durable, generationally significant wealth in music over the past 2 decades share a common structural decision, and it has almost nothing to do with how many records they sold. They prioritized ownership over advances, rather than accepting the largest possible upfront check from a major label in exchange for surrendering their masters. A growing number of successful artists have instead negotiated smaller advances in exchange for retaining ownership of their own recordings, or have built independent distribution deals that pay a much higher percentage of a smaller total, or have used their early fame specifically as a launching platform to build equity based brand businesses, a liquor company, a headphone line, a fashion label, rather than treating touring and streaming as the entire business. The through line across nearly every genuinely wealthy, decades long music career is the same one that shows up in almost every other business we've broken down on this channel. The recurring income stream, the song, the tour date, the stream count was never actually the wealth building asset. It was the marketing engine that made the real asset, the owned masters, the equity stake, the brand, valuable enough to sell or license on the artist's own terms. Let's run both versions of this career the way an honest manager has to. Here's the optimistic scenario. A newly signed artist negotiates a moderate advance rather than the largest number on the table, retains a meaningful ownership stake in their masters through a co publishing arrangement, and their first album performs well enough to recoup within 18 months. Touring income from a mid-size arena run net several $1 million after production costs. Merchandise adds another substantial six-figure sum with minimal overhead, and a single well-negotiated brand partnership in year 2 pays more than the entire recording advance did. By year 5, this artist owns a growing share of their own catalog, has diversified into a brand equity stake, and their net worth is compounding independent of whether their next single charts at all. Now, the realistic scenario, that same artist signs the larger, more tempting advance instead, surrendering their masters entirely in the process. The album sells well, but takes 3 full years to recoup against a bloated video and promotional budget the label controlled, not the artist. A supporting tour booked before the album's actual demand was proven, undersells by 20% night after night, and production costs that don't shrink to match ticket sales turn a headline tour into a net loss for the year. Brand interest stays lukewarm because the artist's cultural momentum peaked with the one hit and hasn't been sustained. 5 years in, this artist is still not fully recouped, does not own their own masters, and every subsequent dollar of new streaming revenue continues flowing first to the label's outstanding balance before it ever reaches them personally. Same level of talent, same chart success on the first single. The difference between these two outcomes, often worth many millions of dollars over a decade, was decided almost entirely by the terms of a contract signed before either artist had any real leverage to negotiate, and by whether the touring and brand strategy was built to bank real profit or simply to look successful. So, can being a famous musician make you rich? Sometimes, but rarely the way the fame itself suggests, and never automatically. The artists who end up broke standing next to a platinum plaque aren't usually victims of bad luck or bad music. They're usually artists who never own the actual asset their fame was busy creating value for. Fame is not the business, fame is the advertisement. The real business, the masters, the publishing, the brand equity, is built quietly in the background by whoever actually holds the paperwork, whether or not their name is the one the crowd is screaming. A famous musician isn't a walking fortune. They're a walking marketing campaign for an asset that may or may not actually belong to them. And the artists who get rich are, almost without exception, the ones who eventually stopped performing the business and started owning it.